Mic test. Do you guys hear me?
Hey, so all right, I think for sake of everybody's time, we'll go ahead and get started here just slowly. Start with a round of introductions and just get started into our slides here. But good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. So we can remain on the title slide there for a second. So first introduction, my name is Hamish Kellum. I'm with Provo Pritchard Consulting Group. So we are working with the California State Water Resources Control Board on a feasibility study for the Prunedale area. Today's webinar is just going to be about sharing results of that study and then also explaining what options we evaluated that study, and then most important, clarifying what happens next and how your community input will factor into that decision. Nothing is being decided today, just to make that very clear. This is just going to be about information and being transparent, and also understanding what that path forward is. All right, so quick housekeeping before we get started. Participant microphones and video have been turned off for the webinar. Please just use the Q&A box for any questions related to the project, and the chat as well for technical issues. You can also log your questions in there, and that we will give time at the end for open Q&A. We'll go through and answer those questions. We also have Spanish language support available through the chat and Q&A. Please notify the chat if you do require Spanish language support, and make sure that it's you. So with that, I will quickly walk through today's agenda. So today we're going to start with a brief overview of why the study was initiated, and then walking through timeline and key findings, then also reviewing system improvements that were evaluated and as alternatives of the feasibility study. Then moving on to talking about funding as well as next steps, and that'll be specifically how your community interest forms into whether this project will continue to the next planning phase. And so just before we get into the study itself, I just want to briefly introduce the groups that are involved in today's webinar, and then their roles in supporting the study. So first off, Provo Pritchard Consulting Group, PNP is known as I said, is supporting State Water Board by being the technical assistance for this feasibility study and leading the community outreach and technical analysis. That outreach also includes meetings like we may have attended back in November of last year. You also hear from some representatives from the California State Water Resources Control Board. We have the Division of Financial Assistance, which oversees project funding, and then Division of Drinking Water, which provides regulatory oversight. I believe we have Sherry from District 29, Lost Landing, on the line today, so it will be available for questions during our ending Q&A. We were also joined by staff from Monterey County Environmental Health Bureau. They provided support as local regulating agency for some of the very small local systems between 2 to 14 connections, and also as a former regulator for public water systems in Prunedale, Monterey County area. We're also, of course, joined by a number of local water system representatives and operators. So really looking forward to hearing more from you at the end of this presentation on your feedback for information and next steps. So all together, this group's here to provide information, answer questions, and help support your community in understanding what options are evaluated in this study and what funding is available for you. Right, so specific introductions from our team. So we have our principal engineer on the project is Heather Bashan. Let's see all of us on screen there. Myself, Hamish Kellum, program manager, European P. I also have two of our assistant engineers, Matt Deeming and Stacy Claros, as well as Armando Marietta, who is providing Spanish language support today. It's one of our community coordinators. And of course, Mindy Gosman as well. You may have spoken with her. A series of outreach calls. She's one of our program assistants, and then also Brianna Hardy is one of our public affairs specialists. They've also spoken on the phone for this. And then I will allow a short second just for State staff to also introduce themselves. So Salim.
You called me, right, Salam? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Salam Al-Yafi, and I'm the grant manager with the Division of Financial Assistance that I oversee this project. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Thanks, Salim. And then also Sherry, if you would mind introducing himself. Sherry might have had an issue unmuting there, but we'll also hear from her later in the presentation during our Q&A. So move forward to why we're here, a bit of background on this study today. So this study has really been about identifying some realistic paths towards providing safe and reliable drinking water for residents throughout the Prunedale area. So we're looking at a very regional solution here, not just one-on-one solutions for systems. Many of these systems all face similar challenges with water quality, reliability, cost of operations, some long-term sustainability issues there as well. So this study was kicked off by the State Water Board to look at those challenges collectively as a region rather than system by system. So our role at PNP is to evaluate and summarize a range of options there and some challenges that will come up through those evaluations and implementation, and then also include technical, regulatory, and cost considerations or evaluation. So really want to emphasize that we are not here as consultants to decide outcomes or force any solution on any systems. This is entirely voluntary participation. So the purpose of this is really to make sure that you have all the clear information you need to make an informed decision on and understand what options for funding there are available for potential next steps here for regional projects. So there is a lot of funding out there currently with the state for systems like yours. So we want to make sure that you're aware of what those options are and also act as a link to those funding programs. So today's presentation is just part of that process, sharing what we've evaluated so far and then explaining how your input can guide what's next. So just a brief timeline of where we're at with that overall project. So we're currently still very much in initial planning stages of the project. Realistically, any construction project, I'm sure you're aware, would extend 5, potentially 10 plus years from here, depending on what scale and project is. So project was initiated in 2023, looking at long-term drinking water solutions for the region. 2024, 2025, BNP has been drafting the feasibility study, evaluating those alternatives and conducting outreach, understand your system's conditions, and then also priorities, constraints of your representatives. So during that period, we completed a series of site visits to most of the water systems involved in the study. Some were inaccessible, but then also held public workshops first week of last November and stopped a local information booth outside the grocery outlet shopping center area was there in town. Helped share some of these draft findings, then also gather feedback from residents and other system representatives, as well as some domestic well owners area. So we're here now today, early 2026. Part of the webinar is to gather interest gather interest, and then move on to the goal of basically reviewing high-level study results and documenting interest from today, and then also future interest in further outreach events within that planning phase. So whether the planning phase begins on its next steps depends on this level of interest today, which we're going to discuss a little bit more in the next slide. All right, so the path forward. This slide explains how these next steps are determined and why we're collecting interest right now. So at this point, on systems to indicate whether they're interested in continuing into the next potential planning phase. It's not any commitment to construction cost sharing, consolidation, anything like that. It's simply just an indication of your interest in continuing that conversation. So if at least 50% of the 37 identified systems in the study express that interest, then the State Water Board may provide support in proceeding to the next planning phase. That phase would be much more involved technical work, coordination, and continued community engagement with all of you. That happens, residents and system representatives would continue being notified about project process or any next decision point before anything was to move forward. It's only done at the drive of the community. So then alternatively, if fewer than 50% systems would express interest, there's then 2 possible outcomes there. One option is that regional project could just halt, meaning that there would be no catch for systems, you continue to pursue compliance individually, to work with the State Water Board in Monterey County directly on that. And then another possibility that we'll discuss in a bit is a smaller alternative project. It could move forward with just a subset of these interested systems rather than the full group. So you can approach it in more of a phased approach. Key takeaway there is that interest here directly informs what's going to happen next. So today's webinar, I want to make sure that systems have enough information in order to make that decision. If you don't, really want to hear from you what pieces were missing, and then what you want to see before you're willing to see any planning phases continue. So that I'll pass it over to Matt Deeming, one of our assistant engineers, so that he can discuss the study scope.
Thanks, Amish. My name is Matt Deeming, part of the design team. I will be talking about the project location, as well as touching on some of the issues that we've identified to date. So first question, where's the project taking place? Generally speaking, project focused on the collection of water systems that are shown on this map. Primarily, they're bounded by Highway 101 to the south, San Miguel Canyon Road to the west, and Echo Valley Road along the north and east. Two additional systems shown here on the outskirts there. Those were also included in the study due to their proximity to the study area, as well as the total size of their systems. Next question, why are we doing this? So the study area was selected due to a significant number of small water systems that are designated as out of compliance or at risk of failure due to a variety of potential reasons. Primary issues that have been identified in the study include the overall water quality, the age and condition of the existing system's infrastructure, issues relating to the lack of system resilience, which includes things such as emergency backup power generators, and fire flow facilities and additional water storage concerns. And lastly, the lack of financial capacity and direct access to technical resources for some of the systems. So the state's goal with this project is to work with your systems to bring the systems into compliance with the state's requirements and to help ensure long-term reliability and sustainability. And then here, this is a list of some of the water contaminants that have been identified within the study area. Not all systems have all of these. This is a combination of everything. So we have arsenic, there's nitrates, hexavalent chromium, or chrome 6, TCP, DBCP, iron, and manganese. Some of the health concerns that have been linked to a variety of these consist of an increase of cancer risk from a prolonged exposure and consumption of the contaminated water, as well as increased birth defects or increased risk of birth defects in pregnant women and young children. Additionally, iron and manganese, they are secondary contaminants, but they do cause undesirable tastes in the water, and they can cause staining on appliances throughout the house. I will pass it over.
So as my colleagues here have mentioned, the goal for our study was to identify feasible long-term solutions at a regional scale to encompass as many identified public and state small water systems that are at risk or have otherwise been identified as ineffective at supplying reliable, clean drinking water to their communities. Robust analysis include evaluations of existing conditions, including groundwater and surface water availability, water quality characteristics, as we mentioned, existing infrastructure, nearby water systems, as well as topography. These were all considered while developing a very preliminary design for a wide-scale consolidation. Ultimately, the study resulted in two most feasible design paths forward that address these issues experienced by your water systems. Starting with the full consolidation, the idea is to have the cost of operations and maintenance shared across this large-scale system and amongst all parties. This would include improvements necessary to ensure sufficient access to clean drinking water, such as 2 new supply wells, a water treatment plant, new water storage tanks, distribution mains throughout the area, service meters, and fire hydrants, as well as pressure-sustaining infrastructure. Existing infrastructure will likely be abandoned per standard improvement requirements, and a new water system governance would need to be established. Site determination would happen at a later stage, but currently we have identified the Manzanita Park area as a reasonable site for these wells to be developed. Hydrogeologic studies were done and have evaluated the drawdown impact, and the impact seems to be minimal. Next slide, please. There's an opportunity for a portion of the interested parties to form a consolidated water system, therefore shrinking the overall service area of the project. This opportunity would result in similar improvements, including the new supply sources, storage tanks, and meters. However, there would be some cost saving available here as the service area would be decreased. The systems that ultimately opt out of consolidation would be required to make strides towards compliance separately from the project, while the consolidated entity would operate under a shared governance structure and ultimately shared operation and maintenance costs. Next slide, please. So while a full system consolidation of the area would result in higher capital needed to construct the improvements and to facilitate the project, small systems in the area would ultimately be relieved of the responsibilities of being a permitted water system in the state of California. By proceeding with a smaller subset of the water systems consolidating, of course, the systems excluded from the project would be responsible for their own compliance. However, this option provides the opportunity to target the most interested parties with this project, and it offers a lower capital cost alternative. Another opportunity with proceeding with a subset of systems could be this could be considered a phase one approach of a full system consolidation, and expansion could be possible in the future. We touched a little bit on the capital cost varying for both alternatives. The latest estimates are available for you all to review here. Construction costs for the all system consolidation is about $58.6 million. Non-construction related costs are about 13.9. And then total project costs for the full consolidation is around $72.5 million. Proceeding with the subset of the systems consolidating, we're looking at roughly $30 million for construction costs, $7.6 million for non-construction related costs, and then a total project cost of $37.6 million. So there is a significant saving there. Something that I think should be highlighted is that the costs are to be fully grant funded, and Heather Bashian will touch on that next.
Thanks, Stacey. So yes, those are large numbers, and we've heard from some other residents in the area that those maybe are even low. So we'll just note that those costs were developed last year, 2025, and as if we are able to continue forward with our evaluation, we'll continue to update those based on mostly inflation, but also just other knowledge in the area, what local costs look like. So those may go up, but as Stacey mentioned, the goal would be to identify grant funding sources to fund all of the components of the project through capital and installation or capital project construction, not ongoing O&M costs. So those are separate, but the work to get from here to a constructed project would go through a couple different methods of grant funding. So our work is being funded through a grant with the State Water Resource Control Board, the Division of Financial Assistance, their SAFER Technical Assistance Program. SAFER TA is how most folks refer to it, or just the TA program. So all of the work that we've done today is funded through that. And if we're able to go forward with additional evaluation on feasibility and then potentially into design, permitting, construction document preparation, et cetera, then that would also continue to be funded potentially under the TA program. The next step would be for the actual construction of capital improvements to build a consolidated water system. And the intent currently would be to apply through the Drinking Water SRF program, which is, again, a program run by the State Water Resource Control Board. There are other financial programs that are out there that could be a potential candidate for us to apply for funding through. But at this point, we're kind of structuring our deliverables and our evaluation based on the Drinking Water SRF program. And then the last bullet there just says that any systems that aren't tagged as part of a regional solution, I know this was already touched on a previous slide, those systems would just continue to comply with the state regulations and the county regulations, depending on their size, as they have been, and would continue to do so into the future. So those costs would be entirely standalone through other funding sources if they were to build a separate capital project and wouldn't be part of this effort. Next slide. So what are our next steps? I know Hamish mentioned this at the beginning, but I'll reiterate a little bit and expand. So for PNP, our goal today is to present you all with information, answer questions. I see George has a couple in the chat already, so we'll answer some questions at the end, and to understand what the interest or non-interest is of the community members and the water systems that we're evaluating. The goal here is just to determine if you're interested in us continuing to evaluate this option to go forward. So as Hamish mentioned, no decisions are being made today. Nobody's signing on the dotted line saying we are 100% going to commit to this. We just need to understand if folks are interested in us continuing to evaluate and provide you with more information so you can make an informed decision. Once we have the information from today's meeting summarized, we will prepare a final feasibility study. So we've given a draft to the stakeholders to date. We will prepare the final feasibility study and share that with the State Water Board, as well as the participating water systems that we've identified in the study. And then, as I know Hamish, or I'm not sure who mentioned, but previous slide about just what's going forward. If there is enough interest shown, so either 50% of the 37 systems that were previously identified or 50% of any smaller subset, then we potentially can go forward with further evaluation of either the entire regionalization project or a smaller kind of initial regionalization project that might just encompass the failing systems and some others that are nearby. One thing to note, I think it was mentioned, but I'll just say it again, is the domestic well owners have not been included in this evaluation. That's not to say that they could not be part of the project going forward. We were just focused on actual water systems that are permitted through the state. So that's just a distinction to be aware of. And then for you, the request to you is submit your non-binding. We'll try to say that a few ways so that it's clear that we're not expecting anybody to know for sure what you want to do for the rest of your water systems history, but just based on information that you're being presented with today, your non-binding interest or non-interest information form by the end of February, and then we'll have additional follow-up outreach and next step information provided to you after that point. And Brianna?
All right. So this is how you can submit an interest or non-interest form. I'd like to just take a moment. If you are on your desktop or a computer, you might be able to take your phone out and just scan the QR code. That will take you to a Google form version of this interest form. If you are not interested, it's still very important that you fill this out just because we need to be able to tie your feedback to your water system so that our team can plan for the path forward. You might have already seen this sent to you in the mail. So if you did not get this in the mail and you prefer to send it back to us on paper, please let me know. And you'll likely see that again in the mailbox regardless, just to make sure we've captured everyone's feedback properly. So I'll give it just a moment if you'd like to fill that out. And then I can also email the link to you all online after this if you prefer the Google form. And then with that, I will open it up to the Q&A. So our panelists are here. We've done introductions, but again, we have Sherry with the State Water Board Division of Drinking Water, and then Salem with the State Water Board Division of Financial Assistance here to help answer questions, as well as our technical team. You can submit questions virtually through the Q&A box, and then you can also raise your hand to unmute yourself, and I can assist with making sure you're unmuted so that you can ask a question live.
Want to run through the ones that are in the Q&A box first?
Yes, so we have a few here. All right, so the first one from George: will fire hydrants be installed with this project and where?
Great question. Yes, the short answer is yes. There will be fire hydrants installed with any regionalization size project or any new water system. So we're complying with current code requirements and regulatory requirements. As far as where that remains to be seen or determined based on the scope and scale of the project and other design considerations, but generally speaking, install a fire hydrant every 500 or 600 feet in a typical municipal style water system. So whether or not there will be one right in front of your house, we couldn't answer that today. But if we're able to continue forward with evaluation, all of those types of questions will be part of our next steps.
And then he had one more question. What will happen to existing water wells on properties within the project scope? Will customers be able to continue to use their own water wells?
So there's kind of two ways to think about that. If they're community water wells, the wells that belong to the community systems now, then the alternatives we've discussed today would include abandonment of those wells. So that's very typical, especially in today's regulatory climate with relationship to groundwater sources and groundwater uses. The other side of that is when you say customers use their own water wells, if there are domestic well owners within the project scope or boundary, there wouldn't be a mandatory notice issued to consolidate those domestic well users into a regionalized system. So if you are a person who lives on your own property, you have your own well, and you're worried about somebody coming in and telling you you have to abandon that and connect to this new water system, that wouldn't be the case. Just to add a little bit more clarity, one item that was included in the feasibility study that everyone is more than welcome to review and understand greater is the idea of creating what would be called a partial consolidation system. And that would be where there is a community system that has their existing well. The well is not meeting standards for some reason or another. We build a regionalization system with safe drinking water being delivered to the communities, but there's a master meter at the community instead of each individual home being a customer of the new system. And in that situation, there is the potential that the existing wells could remain online for irrigation purposes only. However, there's a lot of regulatory framework to build to make that work and work well. And at this point, the state has identified that as not a true compliance issue or a compliance resolution, depending on how it's implemented. So if you do read the study and you see that alternative, just know there's a lot of caveats that would have to be evaluated, discussed, and resolved with DDW and the county before we were able to pursue anything of that nature. And at this stage, if we go forward, we would be evaluating what we call full consolidation alternatives. So water systems would be fully involved in a new regionalization system. But again, the domestic well owners that are in the area would not be mandated to consolidate. Hopefully that's not too much detail and answers your question. I don't know if any of the others have further you'd like to add.
And then we have one from Judy. She says, are you only considering failing systems?
We aren't only considering failing systems at this point. I think maybe the confusion I introduced there was when we talked about the smaller subset option, where we would start with kind of a smaller group of the systems and go forward. If we were to do something like that, we would try to encompass all of the failing systems in that initial smaller project that would start the regionalization, only so that we're addressing the failing systems. There's 3 failing systems that are included in the 37. So that first initial phase would target including those failing systems. We would still include any interested system that were all along in the area of those 3. So that last alternative will show up in the final version of the feasibility study. So if you don't recall seeing it in the draft, that's why. But we have added it and it will be in the final, so you can take a look at that. But no, the 37 are not all failing. They're either failing or at risk of failing for for various reasons. And there's a potential that some of them may have shifted from non-failing at risk to failing since we initially developed the list based on the regulations and constituents of concern that have been evaluated in the area. So hopefully that helps, Judy. Sorry to create confusion.
And then there's one from Ruth here. She just asked if we could put the link in the chat. So I am going to reply with the link to the interest form there. So let me know if you have trouble seeing it. I can also email it to you. And then she also asked, would there be grant funding available to remove existing water tanks, pipes, etc., that are part of our private water system?
So if we were able to proceed with a regionalized system where all of the existing water systems would be part of a new system, then yes, all the existing infrastructure associated with any system that is becoming part of the new larger system, all of that would be properly abandoned. That would be included in the capital cost, has been included in the capital cost to remove tanks, existing wells. Most of the time, we don't remove existing piping, especially if it's smaller diameter, just because the impact to tearing up the roads to remove the existing water mains overrides the benefit. So we abandon it in place. If there are larger diameter mains, sometimes we will backfill those with a cement slurry just so it doesn't create a void in the subsurface, but typically we don't remove them. So largely we're just looking at removing tanks and wells, and maybe some larger infrastructure. Other than that, that's the primary focus. Any other questions that anyone else might have that didn't make it into the Q&A box?
And if anybody would like to unmute and ask their questions, more than welcome to. Or if you just have overall comments, effort you'd like us and state to hear, please feel free. All right, I'm not hearing any. Just for the state staff, I thought I'd just open up. Salam, Sherry, Brian, if you had any questions for us or any comments that you wanted to add at the end of this presentation for residents and representatives here.
I guess I'll just say that since I didn't introduce myself earlier, my name is Sherry Miller. I'm the Water Board and District Engineer for Moss Landing, the Division of Drinking Water. So if you are a public water system, which I think all of you in this room probably are, if you have any questions, you can contact me. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to staff up. Again, it's compliance with regulations is a lot to have to manage and understand. So we are hoping to have some staff people talk to. You get letters from us, you know, and you don't understand them, there'll be some contact information, please reach out.
Yeah, Brian Escamilla, Division of Drinking Water Safer. So I just want you guys to really consider kind of what's being offered. I know it seems like a lot of nothing and then a lot of something. And what they're asking for you today is basically just to keep this project alive, more or less, and moving forward. Just to know that there's enough interest. Kind of disappointed in the low turnout, but I'm hoping that you go and you talk to your community members and you kind of share the message. And, you know, I think we probably would even be open to other outreach events if there's enough interest for it and continue the conversation going. And before I jump off and hand it to someone else, I do want to answer Gary's question. I think probably a previous concern with the Granite Ridge iteration of this project and the lack of funding to support it. I think as of now, really the goal is for all of the infrastructure to be fully funded and for everybody that's part of the system to essentially be a ratepayer to whatever that management structure is. And so there's not a concept now, at least in theory, that doesn't include assessments on all the properties and some, you know, some additional sorts to make this project fundable. Right now is really looking at is, can this fit within our Division of Financial Assistance guidelines of a project that can be entirely funded by grant money? And Salam can jump in if I'm a little off base here. But that's really what we want people to understand is right now we're operating under that environment. And the question about from Judy about focusing on failing systems, I think there's a lot of different paths that regional projects can take, especially if they're focused on domestic wells or state smalls. But this really, I think, started as consolidating the public water systems and is going down this technical assistance path, which I think has a little bit less resistance than other more regional concepts that the State Water Board has. So right now, by getting basically at least the majority of public water systems to commit to moving this project forward, the opportunity for more domestic wells and state smalls to be included, and also potentially increase the authorized budget for a grant-funded project. Basically, more interest means more funding availability, less budget. It could either be reduced or completely eliminated as a viable path forward. So I just want you to consider that and talk about it, that we're really interested in moving this forward, but we really want you guys to be interested in us continuing this effort and moving this forward into hopefully becoming something real. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for that. I'll just kind of add, a few comments on what Brian said. I'll just echo on what he said. And thank you. I think Gary asked that question. Yeah, the goal is to have the state fund this entire project, but with the project this scale, it's not clear if all the funding is going to come from the state. But our goal here and our objective is to streamline and iron out all the details that we need to get all that funding for this project. So your interest in this project, it's important to us. We need to know that the communities and the people are interested to see this project happening. If we don't have the buy-in from the communities, then we cannot move forward with this project. When it comes to planning, I think Heather Passion already mentioned earlier that the TA efforts here are completely funded through our program. So as of now, we do have the planning funding secured for this phase, which is the feasibility study and community outreach. Once we have the required interest from communities, which is 50% and up, then we can move to the next phase and we could possibly secure more funding to continue the planning. And this is our goal from here. We want to continue the planning for engineering, to do the engineering report, to do the plans and specs, and more clearance, the environmental clearance. So as I mentioned, your support is important, and I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sal. Thanks, Brian. See, Ruth had another question in the chat as well. Would the new water system deliver water that does not have current contaminants? Would that mean there's a water processing treatment facility built? And would that be in Manzanita Park? Would there be an environmental impact study done for installing that in the park? So because we've touched on presentation, specific land sites have not been designated for the well sources as well as the well treatment center, but it is very likely that we would have treatment for whatever well is out there. We would hate to drill a well and come up with contaminants and be at the same stage we are now of having to treat. So that would all be analyzed through a test well initially with the project planning phase anyways. So Heather, did you want to touch more on the specifics of where that treatment might be located?
Yeah, I can do that. Thanks, Hamish. It's a great question, Ruth. There is almost certainly going to be a need for water treatment, wellhead treatment. Our hydrogeology team has done a pretty extensive evaluation of the existing constituents in the area. And if you do end up reading the study, you'll find that there's a discussion about a very robust system for treatment. We were trying to be conservative and not miss constituents, but it's potential that when we do a test hole, what's called a test hole or test well process, where we drill basically a temporary well, and then we sample the groundwater as it comes out of that well, and then we test for all the different constituents as well as the amount of production we think we can get out of that well. So a couple different reasons to drill a test well is to confirm all of those assumptions that we've done through paper studies, and then we'll know what constituents we're really dealing with. And if we're able to go forward into design, we can design a treatment system that would address those constituents, as well as leave some space on site in case something else were to come up in the future. And we want to plan proactively so you guys don't end up in a pickle 5 or 10 years down the road. As far as the location, if you look at the study, you'll notice that it does identify Manzanita Park. However, I'll just caveat that by saying our hydrogeology team just identified that as a potential place to get a good quantity of water under the understanding that we're going to have to treat for quality. It may not end up in Manzanita Park. Certainly we need to have robust conversations with the county. That's a county-owned facility and county-owned land. So we're not making any assumptions that that's absolutely where it would end up. They just identify it as a favorable potential location for us to evaluate further as we go farther into the study and the hopeful design. And then as far as an EIR, environmental impact report, an EIS, an environmental impact study, is a federal level study, but we would do a California level study, which is an environmental impact report according to CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. And it's almost certain that we would need an EIR in this area, although it's not guaranteed. Our planning staff, our environmental planners would do what's called an initial study, evaluate. There's 22 different chapters in CEQA that have to be evaluated. They would evaluate the project against all of those. And then if it's identified that we couldn't mitigate impacts, then an environmental impact report would be prepared. Otherwise, what would be prepared is what's called a mitigated negative declaration, which essentially goes through and evaluates all those items and says what we're doing about each one from an impact to the environment. But that's a ways down the road. It's certainly not something we would do in the near term. We need to finish our feasibility evaluation, prepare a full engineering report, make sure we have PDW, DFA support, as well as county support and local system support. Before we get to that level, we need a preliminary design to be able to evaluate it at an environmental impact level. So it's probably more information than you wanted, but trying to be thorough in the answer. It's a great question, and the EIR process can take a year or two, depending on how in-depth it needs to be, how much potential challenge it gets from community members and local stakeholder agencies. So it's a very involved process for sure that we don't take lightly. And I do see a second question. I'll just answer it because I see it sitting there. Maybe it's a question for Hamish, but part of a private water system that supports 7 households, I don't think we've defined whether or not we want only one information form from each system or just from anyone who's interested that's representing any system in the area. So I think we'll take any interest form, but Hamish or Salam, do you guys have further guidance on that?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to say, Heather. That as long as we're getting one from your system, Ruth, then that should satisfy our answering requirement. The main thing is, we want to make sure that if your 6 neighbors are extremely opposed to this project, but then you are the only one submitting, or vice versa, if you are opposed to proceeding with planning and they are all extremely in support, we want to avoid any situations like that. But at least if there is interest from the system, if you can indicate that as general representation of your neighbors, that'd be fantastic. So we can at least move to the planning phase. This was to proceed to full construction funding agreement. That's where we would need much more hard signed, formalized agreements signed from systems and have an authorized representative of those water systems established by a board or owner take place. But for now, yeah, your support letter will be enough.
I want to say I really appreciate the questions from folks. Appreciate the engagement, but also there's so much to explain on a project this scale that it's great to hear what pieces you're interested in understanding better. And if things come up later, don't hesitate to give us a holler. We're happy to continue to provide information. Or if you haven't seen the report, we're happy to provide that as well.
Absolutely. And I would add with your feedback forms, if you have contacts at your water system who have not been contacted by us and should be, maybe they're just an older retired operator or retired board member, but would be really informative in any decisions or project moving forward, please provide their contact information. We'd love to get in touch with them and hopefully have some follow-up one-on-ones with your systems after this if we haven't had the opportunity yet. All right. Anybody have any closing points? Not seeing any further questions here. All right. Well, greatly appreciate all of your time today. Thank you as well to all of our panel members and state and county staff supporting this project. Please reach out anytime with follow-up answers or questions. And if you have any additional information you'd like us to provide, there's an email address and our office line there directly. You can ask myself, Hamish Kellum, or any of our staff members from this team will be able to point you in the right direction. But ask for Hamish Kellum, that will go directly to my line. All right. Well, thank you all for attending today. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time.
Thank you.
Thank everyone.
Thank you.